This is Nick Cole Hamilton demonstrating my FMOD project for Interactive Sound Environment Submission 2. This is for a city called Selene, which I've worked on with Saran Walker and Scott Darcy. So I was commissioned to do the sound design and the music for this project, so I'm going to just go through what I've done here. Now, first of all, beginning in the folder Ambiances, first we have shells. Now, there's 2 audio tracks in here, each one containing a scatterer sound, each scatterer sound containing upwards of, I think, 28 individual discrete shell noises. You can hear, that's an example of one. And so this was to create just a really ambient textured background. Now you'll see these are placed on the height parameter. We'll get to that in just a moment. Now, first of all, the effect that I wanted to achieve, I was aware that I could do by removing the 3D panner on the master track, which you'll see I have done. And then, if I mute this, taking the scatterer sound, increasing the min-max scatter distance to anything, and ensuring that that's pan central. And you'll see that this gives a stereo, a kind of left and right thing going on with the scatterer sound. Now, in the test environment in Unity, which I built, I discovered that this did not work in the way I expected it to work. I think something to do with the distance parameter on the scatterer sound. And so in the end, to achieve the effect that I actually wanted, which is a kind of universal coverage ambience of this shell noise, I as you know, may have noticed earlier, duplicate the track, panned left and right, and that then gives a similar effect but with no distance attenuation, which I believe was the problem. Although, yeah, I was unsure. I'm aware that this is potentially not the most elegant of fixes, but it does achieve the effect that I wanted, and so I'm actually okay with that. Now, on to the height parameter. This parameter is linked to the player's Y position in the game. In my script, I wrote a sound manager script for this. In my script, I have created a public variable, I think called world height, or I think it's called world height. And basically you define the maximum height of the level, assuming that the minimum height is 0, and it will then scale the player's position between those 2 values to a number between 0 and 1, and so I use that to have this ambience only present in the lower areas of the world. And this is something which I've used elsewhere in the FMOD project, and I'll demonstrate in just a moment. So that was the shells ambience. Shore is very straightforward. This is just a single track on the timeline in a looping region. The track itself is looping, and it's just, as you can see, it's titled Ocean Wash. The idea is that this game environment is surrounded by water, and so in the distance you can hear waves lapping. Now, the stone event is very similar to the shells event. You can see I've done the same thing here again. I've got panning left and right on both of these because, again, I wanted this to be a similar effect. Now, this sound effect was created by, well, using a pestle and mortar, basically, just kind of scraping the pestle around the mortar. And this is because the whole world is made of stone, which is cracking and sliding and crumbling. Again, this is linked to the player's Y position within the game environment, and so you'll see it is attenuated in the region which the shell ambience is playing, so those 2 ambiences don't play. And it's also attenuated towards the top of the world, so really just in the main body of the playing environment you'll hear that sound. Now, next up, wind. This is another world ambience in the game. Now, again, this is something which is attached to the attached to the Y position of the player through my sound manager script, and this is so that I can have 3 different wind strengths for kind of, and sort of seamlessly moving through them as well. Now you'll see as the player goes up through the worlds, the wind strength rises And so with the shells, the stone, and the wind, there's 3 different ambiences which will be playing in different areas in the world. So it's I think it's quite a dynamic set of ambiences I've created there. I'm fairly pleased with them, and I think they are relevant to the game, and they also work within the game as well. So now next we have score. This is one of the larger, as you'll see, one of the larger events within the project. In fact, it is the largest. Now the score reflects the different moons or different areas which you will encounter, which contain these paintings of these so-called moons within the world, and each moon, I was instructed, should have their own theme. And then I also wanted to make just a kind of main ambience. Now for the main theme, the main ambient theme, I decided where the moons would have static looping tracks, so just a track that plays from beginning to end and loops back again seamlessly, to just really to give them their own particular flavor and a specific fixed point, make them specific fixed points. I wanted the actual main ambient theme itself to reflect more the state of the world itself, the fact that the world is crumbling, is falling apart, is shifting out of time with itself. And so I created a kind of pseudo-generative score here. Now, the first 3 of these regions are my pseudo-generative scores. First of all, you've got sparse, then main, and then major. Unfortunately, major didn't actually make it into the game. We found there wasn't really an area which could contain it. However, it is pretty similar to the main theme, so I'm not particularly aggrieved at that. Now, the main theme you'll see, in fact, so the sparse theme contains piano and low piano. So the sparse theme is made up of 2 scatterer sounds. The first scatterer sound, is containing these different piano riffs. It has 8 to 10 seconds interval between time. And it also has a delay interval of 4 seconds, so it will only play after 4 seconds. And the low piano, has an interval of 9 to 11 seconds. Again, contains a number of these different things which can play randomly, these different, essentially just chord strikes there. You heard one just there. And this has a delay interval of 5.8 seconds, so you will always get the high riff, the kind of few twinkly piano keys before you get a deep stab. And this uses transition regions throughout, and these are all linked to this parameter area score. So if I give sparse a value of 0 here, that sends it to the main theme. Now the main theme, similarly, is just a more developed version of what you just heard. So the main theme again contains these different piano riff parts. There's one. Again, it is set to 9.5, between 9.5 and 17 seconds, so a little bit more space, in between that, but that is because there are 3 musical parts to this. So the second, you have cello. These are these cello parts here. Just play one now. And again, that has a delay interval of 4 seconds. Finally, this deep pads, which has a delay interval of between 7.6 and 8.2 seconds, and contains a lot of deep pads. Now, it should be noted that almost all of the instruments that I've used are VST instruments. The idea with the delay interval on all of these is so that any transition from this, say from the main score into the sparse score, oops, pardon me, went to the wrong place. The idea being that any transition into here, you will have enough time for what's playing to play out before this begins playing. Okay? As I say, the same, all of that applies to the major score as well. However, the major score didn't finally make it into the game, which is a shame, but as I say, it's not too dissimilar to the main theme, so I think we can live without it. You'll notice I have this transition region called silence here, and this essentially acts as a buffer zone between the looping tracks and the generative score, because the looping tracks really just launch straight into their tracks. Now, I tried using fade-ins. You can see I have used fade-ins at some of them. However, the fade-ins typically where they remain have been used for exiting that score area and then quickly going back into it. So if it begins to fade out when you exit it, and you decide to turn around and go back into it, you'll send a value to mresume. You'll be transported to there, to somewhere similar. It was just because I found that there was a big step off if you just launched right back to the main playing track. Okay, so here we have, so we're in silence just now. We'll send this a 1.5 and we'll go to mbox. And from within this, the only place that we can go is to the fade. So, and then you'll see at the end of the fade that just transitions right back to silence. Now, all of these transition values are controlled through on-trigger enter and on-trigger exit commands within my C# script. So in my Unity project, I have colliders set up, and colliders within colliders. So one large one representing silence, and within that a slightly smaller one. So you enter this area of silence, which effectively silences the main score that's playing. And then you hit, the relevant numbers. So say we were to go to Lilith's theme, that would send a 1.2, and we would go over to Lilith's theme. Now, Lilith's theme is interesting because this is semi-modular. Well, I mean, it is modular in that you have this section that's playing now, and this will then transition into the main melody, which is 1.4, which is essentially the same thing but with a melody riff over the top as well. So there you can hear that little, I think it's Celtic harp I used or something like that. So this Lilith melody was a little bit more complicated getting this to work in terms of colliders and so on. However, I think that I've finally got it up and running. Well, I'm fairly certain I have. And I think it's effective. I think I would have preferred to have just had one sample which it played through, much like the mbox that we just looked at. However, I spoke to Scott and Saran about this and they preferred it this way, and I was fine with that. So we'll give this a 1.25. It transitions to the fade, which will then transitions that to silence. So we have left Lilith's area. And then we can go and visit Nemesis. These are the names of all of the moons which Scott and Saran came up with in their first submission. Now, this track that is used is actually an older track of mine which I wrote before beginning this course. It's not been used in anything. I presented it to Scott and Saran. They enjoyed it. They thought it was good, so we decided to use it. And that is also the case with Chiron's theme, which you can see here. So all the other music was created for this piece. However, Nemesis's theme and Chiron's theme are both pieces of music which I have written, which I had not used in anything, and which were deemed appropriate for the project. So again, we're transitioning to the fade. However, if I felt like, oh no, I want to go back and visit Nemesis again, then transition back into that area, and then that will go to silence. And the situation is the same with Neath, as you can see, and with Chiron as well. Okay, on to sound effects. Now, footsteps. First off. So, footsteps I did after I had done the majority of the work on the score, and the one thing that I will say is I'm using a lot more sensible parameter values within this than in the score. Here I'm just using whole integers of 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Stone is 1. Oops. And that certainly made life a little bit easier when it came to me coding it. I didn't have to have a list in front of me of all of the strange float numbers which I was using. Instead, I just knew that stone was 1, wood was 4, water is 3, sand is 2, and so on. So you learn from your work, I suppose. Now, the way that I've implemented this, you will see I have 4 different materials, and one called No Step. Now, No Step is essentially the same thing as the silence region within the score. Now, I didn't initially want to have this in place. I wanted to have it so there was just the 4 materials, and in the code I would just be telling the emitter to not play if the player was not in contact with a surface, which would make a footstep noise. However, in my experimentation with that, I found there was a lot of weird things happening. I was getting the first footstep would always be of one particular material. I think it was usually wood, no matter what surface I was on. And it just wasn't quite working how I envisaged it. So I implemented it this way with the no step parameter. So when material is set to 0, you're in no step. And then that will, whenever you enter a collider which has been tagged with stone, sand, water, wood, it will then send the appropriate value to the transition within no step, and it will send it to the appropriate footstep noise. Now, how the footsteps actually work. So first of all, let's look at stone, which is here. Now you'll see I have got 2 parameters set up. Material, which is what I've just kind of been outlining. That is the integers which transition between different materials. So that's the parameter. You send that a 1, it transitions to stone, etc. Now I also have this parameter speed. Now on this parameter speed, you'll notice I have 2 stone files, 2 stone audio tracks. The second one having automation, volume automation. So it's only turned on if it has a value over 0.5. So if we are in stone, so we send material at 1, you can hear the sound of footsteps. That is a multi-sound object which I'm using, which is containing, let's see, 14 different recordings of me walking in cowboy boots on a flagstone floor, and then I have duplicated exactly that within this looping region. This is exactly the same thing. Currently, because of the speed parameter, this is set to, the volume of this is set to 0, is off rather. If I give this a value over 0.5, then it creates the effect that we're running. We're effectively playing double the footstep samples within that time. There we are walking through sand. That is arboreal rice. The sound of that. Water. Now you'll notice within water there is no running parameter. I found it just sounded too strange having so many splashing noises going on. And you'll also notice that instead of using transition regions here, I'm just using straight transitions. That is so that the whole water sound will play out before it's cut off. I found it was really jarring if you released the forward button, the move forward button, and then the script then changes the parameter to no step, and it cuts off the sound halfway through. I just found it really odd. I thought if you're walking through water, you should hear the water finally moving as you're stopping. So let's send that 4, and there we go. You can see. Okay. Now finally, the final events that we have here are both very simple. This is fountain. Again, this is just a single track containing one audio file which has been looped within a loop region on the timeline. And this is just, you see it's a recording of a river, but in this instance it has been used as a fountain. I have applied a little bit of a cut off to it just to attenuate. I think there was some slight wind on the recording just to attenuate that a little bit. And similarly, very similarly, we have a torch here, which you can see this is recording of a fire on a hearth, but really we just wanted that spitting and cracking and popping sound, and so we've used that there. I think in total, at current count, there's 152 different sound files in here, ranging from the very, very small, such as the shell noises, to full instrumented tracks, which are upwards of 3-4 minutes long. So this has been a demonstration of my FMOD project. Thank you very much.